Hey everyone, this is Tom. Before we begin this week's episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast, I want to let you know that we're going to continue our DeviceTalks Tuesday sessions on Tuesday. You can join me at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. It's an hour earlier than normal, 3 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, to join a conversation I'm having with Mick Farrell, the CEO of ResMed. ResMed has been in the spotlight over the past year as it's helped meet the need for respiratory devices. It's also been in the forefront of including digital health tech into its devices, and we'll tackle both issues on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Go to DeviceTalks.com to register. We'd love to have you there. Now let's get into this Device Talks Weekly Podcast. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back. This is the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. Happy to have you here. Happy to be here with my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, the executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. TGIF. Here we are.
Are you going to do some grilling this weekend, Mr. Newmarker?
Yeah, I think so. I got some, actually have some chicken brats in the fridge, but you know, you're reminding me though, last time I was shopping for stuff to grill out at the Fresh Time near us, I realized I discovered the real problem of our times.
There's another one?
There's that whole virus thing going on.
And the fires?
And San Francisco looks very, 1980s nuclear war movie,
But you have one more.
Yeah, pumpkin. We got to do something about it. It's out of control. I mean, it's felt out of control a few years, but I think we finally. I heard that they were going to be selling pumpkin spice sausages.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Enough!
It's got to stop. I do enjoy pumpkin pancakes through the winter, but
well, it's a pancake, of course.
It's a pancake. It's like frying pumpkin bread. I mean, right?
Absolutely.
And sausage is good.
Pumpkin muffins.
Good.
Pumpkin beer. No. I tried the pumpkin beer.
Really?
I don't ever buy it, but I bought one last weekend. It was spicy pumpkin. I thought, I like spice. And pumpkin, I'll see it goes together. I poured it out. It was terrible. So I'm with you.
That's a sad moment when a beer is so bad. You're just like, you know what? I'm not even going to try it.
It was making me angry to drink it. I can't do that to myself. I have too much going on. So, all right. Well, that's certainly an important issue. And I'm glad we dealt with that up top.
So we're done now, right? We talked about the important stuff, and hey, have a good weekend, Tom.
Grill some brats. Well, I think we could hit upon a few other items if you don't mind. Today we're going to be talking about single-use endoscopes. I've got a couple of great interviews lined up with the folks at Ambu. I spoke with the CEO Juan Gonzalez and Stephen Block, the head of Ambu US. We talked about the company's growth. It's really a fast-growing medical device company, but we also talked about their move into single-use scopes. It's a great conversation. This is an important issue. So important that I wanted to make sure we heard from the other leader in the space, Boston Scientific. So I had the opportunity yesterday, on Thursday, to speak with Dave Pierce and Dr. Brian Dunkin. They are of Boston Scientific Endoscopy. And they were able to bring us up to date on where Boston Scientific is in this area. And Dr. Dunkin gave a very compelling reason why we should be using more single-use scope.
I bet. I mean, I recall myself that there were a few major superbug outbreaks just a few years ago related to reusable scopes. Some people died. This is actually this is a good thing that we're getting the single-use scopes out now.
Absolutely. And both Ambu and Dr. Dunkin, they both raise the point that it takes over 100 steps to make sure these things are completely sterilized. So you miss one of those and you could have some big problems. And of course, COVID, like in every other case, has only heightened the need. So there are a couple of great interviews. We'll start off with Ambu, again, Juan Gonzalez, the CEO, Stephen Block, the head of Ambu US, and then we'll bring Dave Pierce and Dr. Brian Dunkin in later in the podcast. Now everyone just drop what you're doing, because it is time for, drumroll, Newmarker's Newsmakers. Chris Newmarker, bring number 5 down on us.
Hey, the fifth most popular story on a mass device this week is that Kevin Hykes is the new Kevin Hykes. You know Kevin, right? He's the new CEO of Barty Diagnostics.
Kevin Hykes is one of the nicest men in medtech. He co-chaired another device meeting that I did in Minneapolis a couple of years ago, and just super low-key guy. For the success he's had with Cameron Health, and he was with Viziogen before that. I know he was with Relievant, and he worked on a startup MedAvention. Anyway, he's had some great success, but remains a truly humble and cool guy. So good for Kevin, and good for Barty.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it looks like Barty's got a new patch that gives clinicians more flexibility to monitor patients. Just a really interesting area. So yeah, it's great. So it sounds like you got a neat person as our new CEO.
Absolutely. All right. Well, great for Kevin. What is our number 4?
Well, number 4, it isn't directly a medtech story, but it's definitely really related to it. And that's just that, the major, pharmaceutical companies they've all agreed not to release a COVID-19 vaccine until it's ready, which that might seem like, shouldn't that be a given that, we're not going to have a vaccine until they know for sure it's safe and effective. But unfortunately, FDA is becoming a real issue in this election, and so hopefully that assurance from the pharma companies will go a long way to making people hopefully feel confident that when we do have a vaccine that is released, and hopefully multiple vaccines that are released, that they'll work, that they'll be safe, that we can hopefully get back to a more normal version of our lives.
It's amazing to me that sort of statement had to be made. I mean, I've always believed companies want to do the right thing, and in most cases do the right thing. I've also always thought the FDA was the one that, as tough as they could be on products sometimes, they had the best intentions. Just it's a weird role reversal to have companies come out and say, we're going to do this by the book, because people unfortunately have some concerns about how regulators are responding to all of this. So, well, that is certainly a good number 4. We will push pause on the Newmarker's Newsmakers and get into our first conversation. Once again, I spoke with Juan Jose Gonzalez. He's the CEO of Ambu US. They're based in Denmark. And on the call, we also had Stephen Block. He's the head of Ambu US. Very cool company with coming out some neat devices. And also, we'll talk a little bit about product that made them famous. So let's hear from Juan Jose Gonzalez and Stephen Block of Ambu. Well, Juan Jose Gonzalez and Stephen Block, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you very much for inviting us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Ambu is one of the fastest growing med techs out there. So it's an interesting time to be growing a business like this. Obviously, the pandemic is creating new challenges and new opportunities. So I'd love to find out how you're taking advantage of both. I want to first just hit a little bit upon the history of the company. The Ambu is the name of the company. It's also the name of one of your principal products, the Ambu bag. Which came first? Was it the chicken or the egg? What's the story there?
I think it was first the Ambu bag. And Ambu was founded 85 years ago.
Wow.
And today is considered one of the Danish champions in medical devices. And over the last 80 years, we have transformed the company more than once. And now we are in the middle of a transformation to create this single-use endoscopy market that we think is going to be one of the biggest new markets to come up in medtech.
And Steve, the Ambu bag, can you just, for those who don't know about it, I'm told everyone does, but just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's a resuscitator. It has very strong brand recognition. You see it on any medical show out there. It's in high demand. It's the market leader for resuscitators. Regarding the startup in the US, we started in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So maybe 50 years later than when Ambu started in Denmark. And we were predominantly an EMS company. And that's where the bag came into play. I started in 2013. We were small distributed business, basically, with a small sales force. We were doing about 60 million in revenue. And fast forward 7 years later, we've quadrupled revenue. We have over 500 employees. We are a leader in anesthesia and pioneered single-use endoscopy. So the infrastructure is quite large now, and we're focused on bronchoscopy, ENT, cysto, and soon to be GI.
Excellent. Well, give me Jose, give me a sense of the shape of the company in a global sense. How much of it is outside the U.S., how much of it is inside the U.S., and where else are you in other parts of the world?
Sure. So, Tom, we are a global company today, and the US is the most important market. What Steve and his team have done over the last few years has been remarkable, and the US accounts for half of our sales globally. And then we are very strong in Western Europe, and we have some presence in Asia, especially in Australia, Japan, and China. So that's more or less the mix. And in terms of portfolio, it's about 30% anesthesia, 30% patient monitoring, and then 40% single-use endoscopy. And that division is growing, very, very rapidly. You're talking about 40% plus, which basically means that it doubles, every 2 to 3 years. And that's the main engine of our company,
Let me get the COVID question out of the way. But it's you are a global company. You touch many countries. How has your experience been in different markets?
Let me talk a little bit about globally, and then Steven can talk about the US. First of all, our products are used in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. So actually, in this pandemic, Ambu played a very important role. Both our Ambu bag, the product upon which this company was founded, and our single-use bronchoscopy were at the forefront in terms of the treatment of COVID-19 patients. And then the impact has varied by market significantly, depending on how strong was the pandemic, the type of healthcare system, where it was a government-driven or where it was major healthcare systems. Which basically means that we had significant volatility. So if I look at Europe in the last quarter, it tripled in sales. And it was mainly driven by the key Western European markets. And the US is growing over 20% year to date. So, it has been quite a test for us. We have had to rapidly expand manufacturing capacity and air freight our products to make sure that we fulfill our role as a healthcare company.
Yeah, no, because I'm curious, because it seems as if with the single-use endoscopy tool and the Ambu bags, you are positioned for there's a lot of opportunity there in a difficult time like this.
Yeah, with COVID, it's heightened awareness now with contamination and the risk of infection. So we're in excellent shape. We have a diversified portfolio. So from March to June, with elective surgeries non-existent, some of our anesthesia products were put on hold. But resuscitators and the endoscopy products and any single-use scope product showed a huge increase, probably double increase in Q2. We've also managed to launch 3 new products during COVID with our monitors and 2 new scopes. And the training on virtual training and the engagement of our customers and our salespeople probably was more efficient and more effective than ever before. And I think we're just going to be a much stronger company, at least in the U.S. After this.
Well, let's focus on your news in the U.S. This summer, you got an approval from the FDA for your single-use endoscope, but this was not your first device. Give us a little bit of history of the single-use endoscope portfolio that you have, because it dates back prior to this summer.
So in 2013, or 2014 or so, we launched the first bronchoscope, the aScope 3. And then 2015, there was a CRE crisis with ERCP products. It did catch national attention. I'm sure you've heard of it as far as the infections regarding the ERCP products. So it's been quite of a boom. So we've launched the bronchoscope, the ENT product, and the cystoscope. And we just got approval, as you mentioned, for our single-use ERCP product. The interest level for the GI space is greater than any product we ever launched, especially with the documented infections. So there's a strong interest for a single-use option. As you mentioned, we're also excited that we received FDA clearance with breakthrough designation. Reimbursements available, so I think it's going to get moving along pretty quickly. And we have a price advantage compared to our other single-use competitor. We're about half the price. And we're incredibly excited because it's a multi-billion-dollar market that is much larger than the markets that we've been playing in as of late.
And the competitor is Boston Scientific. I'll say it since you won't say it. But, well, let's focus on reimbursement. Were you impacted this week? CMS issued a reimbursement for innovative breakthrough products, I think related to specifically a pandemic. And that's an area I'm currently exploring myself so I can understand. Were you impacted by that at all? Or did you already have the reimbursement you needed prior to this week's news from CMS? Or the executive order, I should say, that led to the news from CMS?
Well, the reimbursement that was given for single-use ERCP was offset reimbursement. So it's only used for outpatients, which are about 30 to 40% of the patients. So really the price at the pump is what's driving the sale. Our product is at least half the price of the competitors. And there is reimbursement for a small majority of the patients, but overall, it's really the cost of the product that's going to dictate the overall cost.
And is there any need for you to have salespeople in the room when it's used? I would imagine not, to assist with this. It's just sort of get it in the shelves kind of thing.
I would say ideally it's best to have the salesperson in the room. We hired about 160 or so GI professionals. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we probably have the best GI sales force on the market, in the market, excuse me. We have you name it, every top GI company, they're here. They wanted to launch this product. They wanted to make history. They have contacts with all the key gastroenterologists around the country. If they can't get into cases, which obviously we can't get into many cases nowadays, they are doing virtual meetings. They're meeting in parking lots. They're meeting in coffee shops. There's great interest in this product. And we have hundreds and hundreds of demos and presentations in a short time span of maybe a month or two.
Interesting. And those meeting in the parking lots, those are in coffee shops are with surgeons or hospital executives or whomever? All the above?
All the above. Physicians, healthcare providers, administration, executives. It's amazing what's going out there.
Juan Jose, how does this look on a global sense? What are other markets doing? Is price as much of a driver there as it is here? And are you running into the same hurdles as to getting an opportunity for salespeople to interact with potential customers or customers?
I mean, endoscopy, as you know, is one of the largest medical device markets, and it's a very established market, and it's a reusable endoscopy model. And basically what we are doing globally is driving the creation of a single-use market, which is a combination of a product that is 100% sterile, so there is no risk of contamination, that have very strong economics, very advanced technology, and it gives hospitals a lot of convenience and flexibility. So when you look at that value proposition, it actually travels around the world quite well. What we have created in the US, we have done something similar in the United Kingdom and in Spain and Italy and Germany and Australia. Of course, outside of the US, pricing is even more important, and that gives us a stronger position. And depending where you are, there are some additional differences in terms of whether it is a hospital-based or in clinic, and you have different levels of access. But for the most part, healthcare systems are trying to restart electives. They look at single-use endoscopy as a solution to be able to do it without any concerns around infection. No?
So is just looking broadly ahead to where we're headed with single-use endoscopy, is your vision and the vision of anyone else selling products in this market, parentheses Boston Scientific, to have all endoscopes be disposable, or do you see this as a subset of the endoscope market, and there'll still be some that need to be disinfected and sterilized, but there'll also be single-use used side by side? What does the future look like in your mind?
As far as my mind, I seriously see over the next 5 to 10 years reusables. Maybe they won't be gone totally, but single-use will have the majority of the market share. There's just no reason to use a reusable product. Single-use is, the image is better, the functionality, the availability, the cost. It's not about if you're going to do it or convert. It's about when you're going to convert. And, most hospitals, right now, the top 500 hospitals in the US, we've converted 96% of them as far as volume of bronchoscopies. There is no reason not to do it. And the hospitals that aren't doing it are really pointing their fingers to the hospitals next door saying they have the problem, we don't have the problem. And quite honestly, once there's a seminal event, they call us and they convert immediately. So sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, and sometimes it might take a couple of years, but sooner or later they will go single use.
Is conversion, do you consider it if you just get in the door, or is it all the endoscopes are all single use that are used?
There are a lot of different types of scopes. We have bronchoscopy, we have cysto, we have ENT, we have duodenoscope. So we have different salespeople for different scopes. And conversion, I guess the first step to conversion is to have them accept the idea of why they need to go single use. Sometimes it could be a couple of champions within the hospital that start off the conversion, and then it leads to a full conversion. There are some hospitals, very large institutions out there that just totally convert. It's all based on what has happened in the past, administration, possible legalities, workflow, expenses. There's an array of reasons why, and at the end of the day, it has to have a good health economic story, which we do have.
Sure. And Juan Jose, how about outside the U.S.?
What I was thinking is just reflecting on your question. Today's single-use endoscopy is about 1% to 2% of the total endoscopy market. So if you ask me, over the next few years, are we going to coexist? Definitely. In most hospitals, there will be reusable and there will be single-use. But if you were to start doing endoscopy today with the technology available today, you will never create a reusable model. You will never say, let's buy a $200,000 tower with a $50,000 reusable scope. Let's use chemicals to reprocess it. And by the way, at the end, it might not be fully sterile and it might break, and then you will have to buy another one. It's a business model that you will never do it now. So if you ask me going forward, what do I think? Technology is moving so fast, and I'm talking about technology that powers single use, sensors, image enhancement software, artificial intelligence, monitors, lighting, material science. Every year, all the trends to move to single use become stronger, more focus on infection control, more awareness of the benefits in terms of economics, more need for convenience and flexibility, regulators, reimbursement. And then on top of that, you put technology. And I fully agree with Steven. In 10 years, you should see a significant shift towards single use now.
Yeah, Tom, just to add a little bit to that, and cross-contamination is a huge issue. Infections are a huge issue. COVID has heightened awareness. But I'm sure you follow ECRI annually, and scope contamination is in the top 10 in issues that hospitals face on a yearly basis. And reprocessing a scope, there's 100 steps to reprocess a scope, and human error is inevitable. It's going to happen. The studies out there show upwards of 50% that reusable scopes are contaminated. I have just countless stories, and there's many studies. There's one study that said 57% are contaminated. So it's, again, it's not if, it's when.
Great. This podcast allows me to ask stupid questions. So my stupid question, maybe everyone else who's listening knows, is what changed? Why are you able to create these scopes now that can be disposed of as opposed before? Is it just new materials, just cheaper manufacturing? Again, all of the above. What's new in this technology?
I could say two things happen. Number one, technology reached the point where now you can have a single-use endoscopy with an image resolution required to be able to have a good procedure and a good diagnostic. And if you remember your iPhone 5 generations ago versus your iPhone today, the quality of the image. So that sensor, those sensor upgrades, that's actually what is also driving our own innovation. And then on the other side, you have an environment that now is more focused on understanding what is the true contamination level, the importance of infection control, how much it really costs to have all that reusable endoscopy infrastructure, and how does it compare against single use. And I will say those things is what actually allow Ambu to start innovating, to create a market, and now moving into an acceleration phase now.
And final question, I know you need to go. Regarding the agreement with Premier, it's a 3-year agreement. Tell us a little bit about that, Stephen or Juan Jose, and what does that mean? It sounds as if it gives you some degree of exclusivity in the area, or does it?
It does. So we have a fantastic corporate account team and great relations with all the GPOs and IDNs. We've been working with Premier very closely. They've developed and created a single use endoscopy agreement. It's a nationwide agreement, but for sole source, it's more for Premier. It's more for Surpass and for Ascend, which are affiliates of Premier. So the Premier agreement is a nationwide multi-source. But regarding Ascend and Surpass, we have a sole source for bronchoscope. But all scopes are on the agreement.
And that will essentially give you access. The membership of Premier represents 4,100 hospitals and health systems, 200,000 other providers. So, I mean, what does this do for your market penetration in the U.S.?
Well, it definitely helps. It definitely helps in Surpass and Ascend, where we have a sole source, and Premier will work with us to convert those hospitals. Regarding GPOs in general, it just gives you a ticket to get to the dance. There are no obstacles, so it gives us free passage to work with Premier and start converting their hospitals across the board. But regarding Surpass and Ascend, it will definitely give us incremental revenue for sure.
All right, well, that's great news about Premier. Juan Jose, we'll give you the opportunity to wrap this up. I mean, Ambu is a great story. European company growing into a global device company. What does that say for, Ambu's story, but also more broadly about opportunities in Europe?
Well, I mean, the aspiration for Ambu is to be the world's most innovative single-use endoscopy player. And I would say that is quite unique. First, because we are based in Europe, and it has been sometimes if you have a European medtech champion, one that is able to disrupt an established market and create an entirely new one. And that's what we are trying to do. And we invest aggressively in innovation. We believe that we come from the future. We are taking all the new technologies coming up to be able to advance patient care in a way that have not been done before. And we are very excited with the possibilities.
Excellent. Well, it's a great story. I'm grateful that you chose to share it with us. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Tom.
And we're back. Interesting conversation with Ambu. They've got really some tremendous growth, so it's going to be interesting to see what kind of company they turn into in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is our number 3 most talked about, most read item on Mass Device?
Number 3, hopefully I pronounced this right, Theranica, received a CE mark for its Nerivio device for acute treatment of migraines, and this is basically like a wearable smartphone controlled neuromodulation device that provides a little bit of stimulation to hopefully help with pain control. And this actually got a FDA de novo clearance over a year ago, and yeah, there's just kind of like some of these I mean, there's been stuff like TENS devices around, for a long time, but, it looks like that type of technology is just like increasingly getting sophisticated, and, just having some devices that can help us control pain versus taking painkillers that just sounds like a really good thing.
All right, well, let's get into number 2. What is the second most read article on Mass Device this week?
The second most article was, really one that was of our own creation, and that was that our managing editor, Nancy Crotty, she, reached out, to some of the, top insiders in the medical device industry and kind of did a story on, how will the presidential election affect, medtech. And I think one of the big themes that came out of it was that, I mean, of course, a second term of Trump versus, a Biden administration. I mean, they'll be very, very different. But, one commonality, no matter who wins, is that, the relationship between, FDA, and the industry is going to be a big issue just because it's just changed so much during the pandemic. I mean, we've had, this whole, slew of emergency use authorizations. We're just trying to get as much technology out there to fight the pandemic, but we'll have to, circle back, after this hopefully settles down in a year or so and say, okay, how do we, how does the relationship between FDA and the device industry, progress, going forward?
It's going to be amazing to see what the long-term impacts of this year or 2 years will be.
Yeah.
I just feel like we've been rewriting the rules as we go along. So hopefully we'll come out better and stronger on the other side. All right. Well, let's go right to number 1, because this is a story that I think people are clearly interested. It's the number 1 most read article, and it's one that it's a story that kind of keeps on giving.
Yeah. I mean, really. I mean, the trial for former Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes is not going to start until March, but I mean, yeah, there's still just major news coming out of it. And, kind of the big thing this week was that, I mean, it sounds like Holmes is considering making some kind of mental disease defense. And this news came out because the federal judge in San Jose released a court order that was allowing, prosecutors to have her psychologically examined because she's already been examined by another clinical psychologist who could be a potential witness in the trial. So yeah, the order was saying she's going to have to do 2 days of psychological examination that are videotaped. But it's just. Yeah, it's really interesting to see what ends up happening with that defense. The parts of the order that discussed what this claimed mental disease were redacted. So yeah, it'll be we'll see how that plays out. But I mean, in this country, making any kind of defense around mental illness it's just very hard.
Absolutely, great point. All right, well, let's get into our second interview of the day. This, again, I spoke with Dave Pierce. He's the Executive Vice President and President of the MedSurg Group at Boston Scientific, and also spoke with Dr. Brian Dunkin, the Chief Medical Officer at Boston Scientific. And we talked about their single-use line, their EXALT product, the bumps in the road they had in rolling it out, and what the future offers. Let's listen. Well, Dr. Brian Dunkin and David Pierce, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thanks for having us.
So this is an interesting area, single-use endoscopy, and it's an area where you folks made some headlines in December with the approval of EXALT. I wanted to follow up on where you are in this line in the endoscopy business. First of all, how have the first 6 months or so gone with EXALT?
So the great question, and thanks for your interest. So you're right. In December, we were the first company to receive breakthrough approval for single-use duodenoscope. We have done some great clinical work to date. We've now have 3 publications on the technology, 1 benchtop, 2 with a total of 108 patients. So we're doing the right work from a clinical standpoint. We feel like the technology is going to be well received by the customer base. Obviously, in the era of COVID, the adoption has been a little bit slower than we had anticipated. Certainly, late March, April, May, really challenging as hospital administrators were focusing, rightly so, on COVID. We've seen nice acceleration in July, August, and starting in September. So we feel good about it, and we feel like we have a winning technology.
Just so I understand, when did customers actually have the ability to buy and to use EXALT? Was it available in January, or is it just rolled out more recently?
It was really rolled out toward the end of February from a manufacturing capacity standpoint, and then obviously
not the best timing.
The entire shut down in March. But the interest remains very, very high.
Dr. Dunkin, can you speak to the necessity for this kind of technology prior to COVID, and then maybe we can revisit now in the COVID era where concerns about infection are even more heightened?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the necessity really comes out of the difficulty with reprocessing reusable duodenoscopes in this space. I mean, the duodenoscopes probably definitely is among the most complex scopes that we use. And as a result, that complexity leads to difficulties in reprocessing. It's a human factors nightmare, well over 130 manual steps for cleaning a scope and getting it ready for the next patient. And as we've seen with the studies that have come out of the FDA, even when that process is done with oversight and using what's thought to be best practice, 1 in 20 endoscopes that are thought to be patient ready have a pathogen of concern on them and are putting the next patient at risk. So that's, as a clinician, and I've done thousands of these procedures in my practice as a therapeutic endoscopist, that's concerning, right? Nobody wants to tell a patient that you got a 1 in 20 chance that the thing I'm going to use for you is contaminated. So huge need. Interesting, it's still a growing kind of understanding in the clinical community about that need. And that's might be more on an international than on a U.S. basis. But definitely this is a technology that meets that need. And one thing that we've learned, not only is the magnitude of the problem, but is kind of the underlying reason for it. I know in the early days of discussion, the focus was on the tip of the scope. A duodenoscope, as many know, has an elevator on its tip, this movable ramp that I can use to change the direction of the instrument that's passed through it. And that's different, right? So we thought, well, it must be something around the elevator. And certainly it's hard as heck to clean around that thing. And so there was a lot of focus on that. But as we started to understand this problem more, this is a biofilm problem. Bacteria make biofilm. It's like a syrup that they envelop themselves in to protect themselves from their environment and increase their kind of virulence. And biofilms form on any wet surface. So any internal wet surface within an endoscope, duodenoscope or otherwise, is susceptible to a biofilm. So that means if you're going to focus on a replaceable tip or a condom on the tip or something like that, that's a partial solution, which is why we at Boston Scientific wanted a comprehensive solution and leverage our experience in single-use endoscopes, that we've built up over many years to make a single-use device that absolutely eliminates the possibility of endoscope-acquired infection coming from reprocessing.
Well, hearing that's a really good sales pitch to me as a patient. Sounds like why would there be any resistance at all? Maybe I'm mischaracterizing it as resistance, but David, in selling this, talk a bit about the force you've assembled to engage customers. And what is sort of the dialogue around that? What would prevent someone from seeing this as an improvement?
Yeah, so Boston Scientific Endoscopy has been the category leader in the GI endoscopy space for many years. We've been in this business for 40 years, and we've been pioneers in so many different technologies, from single-use biopsy forceps, devices to create hemostasis, multiple stents for the different anatomies throughout the GI tract. In 2007, we launched our first scope, the Spyglass. We're on our 4th generation of that technology right now, and it definitively changes the way a clinician can diagnose and therefore treat patients with pancreaticobiliary disease. So we've taken that 40 years of experience and intimacy with the GI community and built what we feel is a fantastic scope, single use, eliminates the infection risk, as Dr. Dunkin alluded to, and we're putting it through what we think is the best GI sales channel in the industry, and combining their efforts with our world-class device portfolio now augmenting it with a single-use scope portfolio and really bringing the full force to bear. When we go into a hospital, there's a lot of constituencies that are going to be involved in making this decision, right? Obviously, you want to have clinical support. You want to have the support of the infection prevention team. And then in some cases, C-suite folks get involved because it's a different economic situation than the reusable scopes. We feel like we're doing the right work, answering all the questions for those constituencies. We've applied for and received the TPT for Medicare outpatient. We're working on getting a new technology add-on payment for the Medicare inpatient. So we're doing the right work to ensure that any economic concerns are addressed. And in the long term, we're going to have a technology that's safer for patients, puts the staff of the hospital at a lower risk, increases efficiency, and not have an economic challenge to it.
And we've discussed prior to my pushing record that I've talked to Ambu, which has a product in the field as well. There's a difference in price between yours and theirs. Theirs is cheaper. How do you see that sort of playing into Boston Scientific story? Is that something you need to overcome? Is that difficult to overcome? What's the situation on price?
Yeah, so for us, we feel like we're pricing our scope appropriately. We think the value that our scope delivers clinically, from an efficiency standpoint, from a safety of your staff standpoint, and obviously eliminating the risk of infection, that full package of value, we feel like we're priced appropriately, and ultimately we'll work through Medicare to get all of those patients covered, and we'll work with private payers following that to get private payer coverage as well.
And Tom, if I just can add one thing on that. I mean,
please do.
This is a nuanced procedure, doing ERCP with a duodenoscope. Dave talks about Boston Scientific, and we've been in this space for a long time, making the devices that go through that scope. So we have a pretty deep understanding of what it takes to do the procedure successfully. And making a scope that can do that is significant. As an endoscopist, we get a little bit superstitious, almost like your favorite baseball bat or tennis racket or something, right? Like you get used to what you have in your hand and the success that you have with it, and meeting those requirements with a single-use platform is not an easy thing to do. And so I think that having a device that looks, feels, and functions like a reusable device doesn't change the procedure for me as the clinician and gives me the same success rate at performing the procedure. That's no small task, and I think that that's also part of that formula on value.
That's a great point, and it's in line with the question I want to ask on the clinician front. We can talk about dollars, and administrators have their own priorities, but clinicians, are they? Yeah, I think you hit upon this a little bit earlier on, but is this a technology, an idea they're willing to embrace, or do they again, I guess maybe is there more heft to a reusable device that they're comfortable with? Is there something that they're clinging to?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd characterize it as clinging. I would say if you've never seen the scope, the idea is, you meet it with skepticism. A reusable scope is, costs more than most people's car, right? That's an expensive device that's sophisticated. You look at this thing like, this is a sophisticated piece of equipment. How could you possibly make this to a single-use platform? But then when they get it in their hands, and even more when they use it for a procedure, that part is impressive to me. In fact, one of the things that I take as a great sign of success is that when I'm watching clinicians do procedures with this scope, whether it's part of a live broadcast or if I'm in the room with them alone, there's discussion about the scope in the beginning. Oh, it's a little lighter. The wheels feel like this. The shaft feels like that, which are kind of the usual discussions you have when you change to a different manufacturer. If I use the reusable X and then I go to a reusable Y, it's going to feel a little bit different. And that's what people equate it to. But then once the scope's in position and they're doing the procedure, we're not talking about the scope anymore. We're talking about the procedure, the cannulation, the disease that the patient has, and that kind of thing. That's exactly what we were trying to accomplish in developing it. So there is this skepticism until they get it in their hands and use it, and then I think that skepticism goes quickly away.
And Brian, I mentioned earlier the clinical publications, the two that have 108 patients, and maybe speak to the kind of how the ASG classifies ERCP and that the scope's been successfully used in even the most difficult cases.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dave. ASG, which is really the dominant U.S. society around therapeutic endoscopy and really the voice of ERCP in the healthcare community. One of the things they do that they delivered to us is a measurement tool for kind of the difficulties of ERCP. Like, okay, if you want to do comparative studies, how difficult is this case versus that? So they classify ERCP in 4 different categories, 1 being the easiest, 4 being the hardest, and it has to do with anatomy, disease, those kinds of things. And EXALT, in the studies that we have used it in to look at its performance, been used in everything, 1 through 4. We didn't want to cherry pick cases, take the 1s and 2s, not do the 3s and 4s. In fact, I was talking to one of our investigators. His first case was a 4. It's just, he's like, I wouldn't have chosen that if I was making a decision, but that's the way the trial was designed, and that's the way we went, and it went successfully. So again, it does speak to the performance demands on this scope in general, and then being able to recreate that in a single-use platform.
That's helpful. I know you have a few more minutes, so just 2 quick questions. What is the vision for single-use scopes going forward? Is this 5 years from now? Are 95% of these going to be just the single-use? Is it going to be 50-50? How does this play out in Boston Scientific's plans?
Yeah, so I'll take that, and then Brian, if you want to grow with that a little bit. So prior to coming back to endoscopy recently, I spent the last 4 years in our urology business, and four-ish, almost 5 years ago, we launched our first single-use ureteroscope, and the adoption was slow but steady. But over time, what we started to see was the utilization went up and up and up and up because of the fact that you could confidently know that there would be no infection associated with the scope. You knew you could test and work that scope as hard as possible, because even if there was some performance deminimization, you weren't going to have to use that on the next patient. So you could take on the hardest and most difficult cases and do those. The efficiency, the scope was always available. You didn't have to rely on the hospital cleaning staff to get your product back to you. So all of those factors led to a much broader adoption than we had anticipated at first. And I can see several of those factors coming into play with EXALT going forward.
Yeah, Tom, I might just add to that from a clinical standpoint. It is one of the questions we get frequently is, well, which patients should I use it on? And I think in the beginning, many are going to segment patients, and they're going to segment them according to risk, like we do in a lot of things in healthcare, right? We have to make kind of risk-benefit decisions with our patients. And so, we've talked about patients that have something compromised in their immune system, a transplant patient or an immunosuppressed patient, cancer patient, those kinds of things, where if they were to get an endoscope-acquired infection, they're not going to tolerate that well. That's a patient to consider on. The other is if a patient's coming to my endo unit and they already have an active infection, that infection could contaminate my existing inventory of reusable scopes. So I got to think about that as well. And so those are 2 big areas that we talk about. I will say I've had discussions with clinicians all the way from the big academic centers out to more small, medium and small communities. And some of the ones I've talked to said, look, I do a couple hundred of these procedures a year. I don't do a couple of thousand. I have 1 or 2 scopes, and it is becoming untenable for me to reprocess the scope the way it has to be reprocessed according to the new guidelines and that. And by the way, the thing's starting to run out, and now I have to on its life, and now I have to make a decision about a new capital equipment. They're planning to go with a single-use scope. It can meet their needs, and they don't have to worry about maintaining this scope, this reusable scope inventory. So I think you're going to see, at the very least, the patient segmentation, and then a build from there, depending on kind of my local regional issues and also the patient populations that I'm serving.
That's excellent. And final quick question. I know you need to go. Brian, you spoke earlier about the impact that COVID had in March and April and May. The impact is long lasting. Salespeople are having a difficult time getting in hospitals. How has this impacted your selling of EXALT and moving into the area? Are you being hindered by an ability to get people connected with physicians? If so, how are you overcoming that?
So I think I'll take a quick shot at that, Brian, and then you can add any points. I think one of the huge advantages that we have is the long-term relationships that we have with really every hospital that does ERCP in the country and many around the world. So we have access as we're supporting cases. We'll get called in to support a difficult case. We'll get called in for any number of reasons. So access is definitely not where it was pre-pandemic, but I think we certainly have an advantage just based upon our long-term relationships. And we've also very effectively pivoted to some virtual tools to engage our physician customers, their staff. So we're teaching, educating, and servicing virtually. And we're also able to reach out through the other constituents in the hospital in virtual ways as well.
Anything to add? Final word, Dr. Dunkin?
No, I mean, I just, we're doing e-preceptorships now to extend that reach so clinicians that want to see this scope in action can get that experience. And then the only other thing I would say in this COVID era is one of the things that I found interesting from a number of the clinicians we talked to is that they're looking at the use of this technology to minimize exposure of staff to COVID because it's one and done. When you're done with the procedure, there's no transport, reprocessing, and exposing really highly trained staff, whether that's the nurse and tech in the room or the reprocessing tech, to having to reprocess a scope on a COVID patient. So we've had clinicians come to us with that concern in mind as well. And I think the COVID experience is going to have people in a heightened sensitivity about managing infectious issues forever, basically, not just when the pandemic goes away, God willing.
Great point. Well, thank you both for your time and your insights and for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
All right, and we're back. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dave Pierce and Dr. Brian Dunkin of Boston Scientific. Chris Newmarker, this is the time when we say goodbye. But first, we forgot to remind people that they have an opportunity to join in on this fun little call on September 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Chris and I record these intros on Zoom. We'd love to have you as part of the conversation. Probably will use some of the call in a future podcast. So if you have a story to tell or some insights to share, please do shoot us an email or shoot us your email address on LinkedIn. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. Say hi, shoot your email. We'll add you to the invite for the Zoom meeting, and we'll just have a ton of fun. I hope we get a good crowd.
It'd be great. What time of the day is it on the 17th?
3 p.m. Eastern
3
time.
3 p.m.
Yes.
All right. So we can sit around, sip some pumpkin beer.
No.
You think?
Nice try, Newmarker. No pumpkin coffee either. None of that crapola.
We're going to... No pumpkin spice latte.
The latte, if you're going to take pumpkin, I guess the latte is probably the least effective. But anyway, I don't know. No pumpkin whatsoever.
We got to stop.
Stop breaking me down there, Newmarker. Yeah. So where can folks find you on social media, Chris, so they can send you their email and let you know they want to be part of these ridiculous conversations?
I'm right here. I'm right on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a new marker. And you can find me on Twitter as well, at Newmarker. Always happy to chat.
Same here. I am on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. I'm on Twitter, at medtech. Tom. Well, that is a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. Please, 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 please share this podcast on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Tag Chris and I and all of your friends so they all know that this is the greatest podcast on earth. We'd love to have more folks listening. We'd love to talk with people on LinkedIn about the things we're talking about and love to know what we should be talking about in the future. So make sure you reach out and, again, share this on your social media channels. And please make sure you subscribe to the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. We'd love to have you get these podcasts as soon as possible. Just push the subscribe button on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and we'll send future podcast episodes directly to you. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks again for tuning in. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast.
Pumpkin power.